Hi, folks. Welcome to the 10 Laws with East Forest podcast. I'm East Forest. I'm going to be giving you something a little different this week. This is going to be a behind-the-scenes look at how some of these songs were made for the Ram Dass East Forest project. And this week, I want to show you a bit about the track Home. And that's a track where Ram Dass talks about his first experience with psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in what is commonly known as magic mushrooms. And I just want to let you know how that came about and then how the music came to be. I think some people might find that interesting, and it's kind of fun for me because I get to go back in time and remember how it all happened. So not getting into the backstory of how I ended up with Ram Dass in the first place, I think I've talked about that pretty extensively. I was there in the room with him in his study, and I essentially was presenting him with questions. And from those questions, he would riff. He would answer the question. And I looked up the actual recording, before I'd edited it and before I'd cleaned it up, of just the microphone that was on Ram Dass as he's sitting in his recliner. And you can hear the question that I ask him, and then you'll hear his response. And I'm playing this in real time, so this is with the pauses that were naturally there. Essentially, I didn't edit this for time. So here's me asking him about psilocybin. I know for you, psilocybin was an early, powerful experience that helped you open, and for me too. And Roland Griffiths, you just met recently, and there's the book downstairs by Michael Pollan. It's coming back. The research is coming back into the consciousness of society as psilocybin as a tool. What promise do you see for psilocybin, and how can we use this for a tool as we move into the future? Or how it affected you either way?
Psilocybin is my friend. Psilocybin got me onto the spiritual path. In my first trip,
And he went on from there. So as you can see, it would take some time. It could be a word and then 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and then another word. But what was amazing to me is that when I went back to the studio and essentially just isolated each of the words or phrases to use them in the music, he had a complete, full, wonderful, cogent thought that was not just well thought out, but it was actually quite beautiful and, of course, smart, effective, and funny. So looking back, it's really interesting to think about his internal process as he's hearing the question from me and knowing what he wants to say, and then essentially really focusing his mind and his energy so that he can get it from start to finish, which may take 15 minutes or 30, or with the case of the song A Miracle, an hour and a half. So after all that, I went back home to the studio and I started thinking about music for this. And this was one of the songs. I had some songs that sort of already existed, like piano recordings that I had made. I wasn't quite sure what they would ever turn into, but some of those became the basis for songs on this record. And then there were songs in this record that were fresh. And at the time, I didn't know where it was going to head stylistically. So I was sort of trying different things. So some songs were just working with the piano acoustically as an instrument, and others I was working on the computer and sort of starting from a virtual instrument place or electronic beats, things like that. And I'm always kind of searching for a variety of sounds before I know where things are going. So for this one, I can't remember where I was when I did it, but I remember I often use Reason as my main DAW that I used to record in, which is a little weird, I know, but I've used it for a long time. I used Pro Tools for a long time, and then I just like the workflow in Reason. And I think I came up with a little piano riff. I was using the Contact Library stuff, and I had the Nils Fromm's Una Corda piano, which is, I was familiar with this piano that he had built for himself. It had single strings instead of like most pianos, especially in the mid-range and the upper range, have 3 strings per hammer, per note. And he wanted to build one that had 1 and would just give it a different sound. And so they built this instrument. It's called the Una Corda, and they sampled it. And I was playing around with it. And I first came up with this sort of like just a simple little like two-handed riff with the piano. And from there, it's actually 2 pianos. Now that I listen to it, it's the Una Corda, and so it's like two actually different pianos, and that's just to give it sort of a different texture as opposed to just one piano doubled. And from there, I think I usually that kind of creates sort of a melodic chord progression. A lot of things start from a chord progression because, the chords kind of create a kind of feeling. And so I'm usually looking for a rhythm after that. And I started working on the drums. And sometimes I just start with like a kick drum, get the basics going. And then I start searching around for different vibes of percussion on top of that. So I think it began with just this kind of kick drum, snarey thing loop. And I instantly felt like it was sort of starting to get this sort of calypso type vibe. And I started searching around for some samples and some loops just to kind of lock in that feeling, to kind of remind myself. And then I always feel like I can replace those later. And so I found some percussion to add to that vibe and like, okay, let's head in that direction. But of course, it needed some bass, and I just threw in some sort of a simple synth bass part that was pretty simple. And we were sort of off to the races from there. I'm always, as far as whether I put vocals in a song or not, that always just comes back to the question of, does it serve the song? And for this one, I just didn't hear that it was calling for it, especially with a lot of the stuff with Ram Dass in it for this whole record. I didn't sing on it so much because I didn't want to take away from what Ram Dass was doing. The music was always there to support what he was saying. So this one had, the subject matter of psilocybin. For anybody who's has any experience with mushrooms, they know that it has a bit of a playful character to it and almost like a carnival-esque vibe sometimes. At least I felt that way. Sort of curly cues and swirls. It's stereotypically there's phrases like the little people, the Niños Santos is a way it's called in some indigenous use, the little children. So I at some point wanted to put in as sort of like, instead of a vocal, as far as a playful instrument, this mellotron flute sample. It's the same flute that was used on the Beatles' Strawberry Fields Forever. So if you hear that song, you'll hear it's the same sort of sound. It's like a gritty mellotron sample. Mellotron's like a very old, early sample synthesizer. And I just like the vibe of these little flutes. It's something that you hear it on Ritual Mystical with MC Yogi, and I just wanted to use it again. So the track kind of sat for a while as I was working on other ones, and eventually I would plan out what kind of real instrumentation I wanted to add into this that either didn't want to do inside the box in the computer, or that I just thought would sound better if I brought in a real instrument, which is usually the case if you have that luxury. So I booked a session in Portland at a studio called the Map Room, and I have a lot of friends there I know who are professional musicians, great musicians, and I thought if I can book one day, I can bring everybody in, record them, and get all these little things I'm trying to get for all these different songs. It was a bit ambitious, but I also knew from experience that if I just booked the session, that in itself would force me to be ready by that day, and it kind of forces you to get some of the songs done. So I booked the session, and I brought some folks in. One of those people was Owen Hoffman-Smith, who plays cello. And I brought him in to play cello on the song Nature. But when we had a little meeting ahead of time, just sort of a pre-production meeting, and I saw like a double bass on his floor in his place. And I said, apparently you play double bass. He plays a lot of bass. I said, could you bring that day? Because it might be useful. And he did. And I remember we didn't have much time left in the session, but I said he's very quick. He's a very quick learner, picks up songs real fast. I think he was at the time, one of his side jobs was sort of like one of those karaoke bands that he has to learn 500 songs or something. And so he was in this mode of just, you hear a song once, okay, let's do it. And we had 10 or 15 minutes to go, and I threw him in the ISO booth and put up a real nice U47 through a tube preamp and asked him to play some upright bass on the track. And boy, did it bring some life to the music. And I love the character of this instrument and his playing. And not just that, like it brings in all that other wonderful ambient sounds of the fingers slapping the strings and his breath and the woodiness of the instrument. That kind of stuff really breathes a lot of life and human character into a song, which has always been there for, most recordings until recently when everything became inside the computer, and we don't have that. We actually emulate that sometimes. Well, of course, it's always nice to get the real thing. I like that too, like when you hear the creak of the piano bench or the floor on the song Nature at the beginning. Some people would point that out like I should fix it, but I was like, I like it. So also in the studio was someone named G. Tanzer, who I brought him in to do percussion for 2 songs, and this was one of them. And so I had those early percussion loops, which definitely gave the right vibe for the song, but I had this idea that if we could replace it with real percussion and different stuff, it would sound a lot groovier and a lot better. So he came in and we had some congas that we did, put some MD 421 mics, I believe, on that, as well as anything else we could find. Tambourines. We found a mason jar in the kitchen and we're hitting that sort of Cuban style. And it was just all ways to try to, he was just giving me lots of different loops, and then I was going to play with it later to create the percussion track. And this is sort of what I cobbled together. Yeah, that's the glass jar there and some shakers and stuff. And then he had this instrument called a blossom bell, which actually happened to be in the same key as the song. And then we got the congas in there and like a clave. And it all just kind of got put together. So the last person that I added on this track that was acoustic was my friend Thatcher Schmid, who's played on lots of East 4 stuff over the years, things going way back to my old podcast, which is no longer up. I took it down. That's another story. But he played on the album like Music Meditations. There's a song called Slowly But Forward, or on Love Bomb, the song Lightbox, that's him doing the viola and violin. And so that was just something I wanted to add for this. And so we brought him in, and he threw down all sorts of little riffs and ideas, and a lot of them I didn't use. but there were a couple little nuggets in there, particularly this pizzicato stuff and these fast little riffs that ended up adding to this song and adding to that story that I was mentioning before of the playfulness and the sort of swirly quality and that bouncy quality of the psilocybin. And then various riffs. I think this was my favorite, where it's just kind of bananas fast playing. Yeah, and that was pretty much the bulk of the instrumentation of the song. And at that point, you just kind of sit with it and make sure it's vibing out. And one thing that I really liked over time with this song was its sense of space. There were lots of sort of like pluckiness to the instruments, like the upright bass you heard, dum, 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 as opposed to long, elongated notes. The same thing with the pizzicato in the violin and the various percussion stuff. And so it created a lot of sound, but there was also a lot of space within that sound. And that's just a character that I really, really enjoyed in the song, which in some ways, it let there be a lot of activity in the music, but still give a lot of space for Ram Dass to do his thing. And so that's basically a little bit behind the scenes on how the song Home came to be. And now I'm going to play the whole song in its entirety. I hope you enjoy. You can check out the East Forest Ram Dass project wherever you listen to music, but eastforest.org will give you all those links. And if you want to host a listening party, that kind of stuff. I hope to see you on the road. eastforest.org/tour. I am on tour right now. And please find a city near you and come say hi. This is Home.
Psilocybin is my friend. Psilocybin got me onto the spiritual path. In my first trip, I did it with Tim Leary and Alan Ginsberg. Kitchen in Tim's house, but the talking was too much for me. And so I went into the living room, which was dark, and I sat down on the couch, and I thought, I have my body at least. When I looked down, there was the couch. There was no me sitting on the couch. There was no body. No roles. No body. I sensed in me a place of love, and I said, I'm home, I'm home, I'm home. planes of consciousness. I had never done that before.